And I'm just going to continue to say, as it relates to the case that we're seeing in Delaware, I'm just going to not speak to that. Uh, it is an independent matter. This is up for the Department of Justice. Even with the question that you're asking me, it's one of those legal criminal matters, and it's up to that legal process. I'm just not going to speak to it here.
And it's been a kind of crazy, chaotic legal process that started really kind of unfolding yesterday late afternoon. Welcome back to the program. Dana Lash here, bottom of this third hour. You can listen across the country. You can follow the simulcast online, also 347 Direct TV. That was Karine Jean-Pierre just moments ago talking to the press at the White House when she was asked about this plea, or well, really absence of a plea deal in this Hunter Biden investigation. It's been confusing and chaotic, and I have a million questions. And I think one of the best people to really break this down, he always does such an amazing job at this, our good friend Andy McCarthy, best-selling author. He's a contributing editor at National Review. You can see him on Fox News. Former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney. His bestseller, Ball of Collusion: The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency, a must-read. Andy, I have to get your take on everything that has happened just in the past 24 hours, because this seems like it's very unusual. And I know that there's a lot of debate back and forth on how apparently nobody knew the terms of this now non-existent plea agreement, and why none of this was put into writing. What is your take on all of this?
I think, Dana, what happened is that this was a political exercise that they tried to dress up to look like a standard legal plea. And the problem they had is the judge wasn't in on it.
Yeah, it's kind of important.
Yeah, well, look, the most important thing in a plea agreement for both the defendant and the government is what the immunity term is. The defendant pleads guilty because the plea agreement and the plea itself is a double jeopardy shield against future prosecution on whatever in the agreement they agree is covered. And the cutesy pie thing they tried to do here, because this is so political, is they were letting Hunter plead to two misdemeanors that were supposed to be covering all of the tax charges that are conceivable between 2014 and 2019, even though the Justice Department intentionally let the 2014 and 2015 counts run to lapse under the statute of limitations, which is a whole nother scandal. But the idea is, what Hunter wanted to be able to say is that plea not only covered the tax charges, but the facts underneath the tax charges, and therefore any charges that could be extrapolated from that time frame. So that would cover like money laundering, Foreign Agent Registration Act, other tax charges, any other conspiracy charges, that sort of thing. And the Justice Department knew, because it's Biden Justice Department with a neon blinking conflict of interest doing this investigation, because the Attorney General hasn't done his duty and appointed a special counsel, which the Justice Department regulations require in a situation like this. They're hoping nobody will notice that. Hopefully people are starting to notice it. But because this is a weasel deal, what the Justice Department knew was, if they put that kind of an understanding in a plea agreement, the public would have gone crazy, that all those potentially serious charges were being immunized in connection with this two misdemeanor plea deal, and throw in a gun count that the normal person would do time for because it's a 10-year count, that this guy wasn't even going to really be prosecuted for it. They were going to just dismiss it after a certain period of time.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, so if they put all that in writing, people would have went nuts.
Yeah.
So they put their little heads together, and they come up with this very vaguely worded agreement, apparently, so that Hunter would be able to walk away and say, the case is over, I've got immunity from everything. The Justice Department would be able to say, we have a continuing investigation and we can't comment any further. And they would hope the whole thing would go away. But the thing is, in a legal agreement, you're supposed to write things clearly so that everybody has an understanding of what's on the table and what's being agreed to. So the judge said, whoa, 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 wait a minute here. What are you immunizing him for? And it turned out that they objected at that point, the Hunter people did, because they and the government, publicly at least, couldn't agree on what was covered by the agreement. And I think actually the Justice Department completely agreed with Hunter, but they couldn't say that publicly because it would have been scandalous.
Yeah.
So they had to say, there's a continuing investigation. It doesn't cover him on that. And the Hunter people had to then say, whoa, wait a minute. We're only doing this because we thought we were covered on everything. And then the whole thing blew up.
Wow. So they thought their theater was going well, and then it kind of fell apart. It seemed weird to me. We're talking to our friend Andy McCarthy that they would ask or expect immunity for from prosecution for ongoing investigations, like investigations that are currently, they're still in the middle of them.
Yeah, well, that's a good question to ask the Justice Department in particular, because you have to ask, if this was a legitimate investigation and a legitimate plea proceeding, what on earth motive does the Justice Department have to give a plea agreement to one of the main subjects of a continuing investigation on 2 misdemeanor charges that are just a small slice of the overall thing they're looking at? They would never do that in a normal case. There's no reason to do it. I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago how they let the 2014 and 2015 counts go. Mm-hmm. It was the Justice Department that did that, according to the whistleblower testimony. The defense, in the interest of getting a global plea agreement that would settle everything, because that's what they want, right? They want a complete shield from prosecution. They were willing to, if they needed to waive the statute of limitations in order to get that agreement. It was the Justice Department that that ended up not taking that agreement and letting those counts go. And I'm completely convinced, everybody keeps talking about, well, they let these counts lapse. And that is scandalous. But what we should be looking at is, what are the counts that they let lapse? It's the Burisma counts. The 2014 and 2015 stuff is what we're now hearing, according to the information that the FBI informant got that was not given to the IRS investigators. What we're now hearing is that, number one, the sinecure that Hunter got, where he was paid this obscene amount of money to sit on this board, even though he had no relevant experience, was part of a bribe by Burisma to get favorable treatment for Joe Biden, who had a lot of influence at the time as vice president over what was going on in Ukraine, because the Obama administration was trying to stand up this new Ukrainian government. This informant, according to the head of Burisma, the head of Burisma tells this informant putting Hunter on the board was part of the bribe. And then the other thing is, he says he bribed, in addition to that, Hunter and Joe $5 million apiece. Now, you can call a $5 million bribe all kinds of things. You know what they call it down at the IRS? Income. So how is it that they're doing this investigation? The Justice Department's going to give away the store on 2 misdemeanors, and it turns out that there's $5 million more potentially in income that he didn't declare. And the FBI and the Justice Department haven't even told the IRS, which is supposed to be investigating the tax counts, oh, by the way, we have evidence of this other $5 million. So why do you think they let those counts go?
Yeah.
Because if those counts are in any indictment, they explain the whole scheme. The Justice Department wants this to go away because it's the Biden Justice Department. If you had an independent investigation, there's no way that would ever happen.
Which is why they've never had one. Talking with our friend Andy McCarthy. Is this, because what happens now? So now he's pled not guilty. Obviously this case is going to go forward. There was some speculation that this is a stalling tactic from Hunter's attorneys. Where do you think that, how does this proceed from this point?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because somebody asked me a little earlier. So now that the deal is blown up, I guess they go to trial.
Yeah.
And I said, go to trial on what? Because you may have noticed they never indicted him. The only thing that's in front of the court is this one little weasel deal that they did today that has 2 misdemeanor counts on it. Now, in a normal case, the Justice Department would indict the case because that stops the statute of limitations from running.
Right.
And it doesn't prevent you from continuing plea negotiations, but it would be too embarrassing for the Justice Department if they did an honest indictment that laid out the whole case against these guys. Do you think after they did that, they could conceivably then bring Hunter in and give him a 2 misdemeanor plea? Once they laid out in a public document
No
what the whole
way.
case says. So everybody says, the thing blew up. I guess we could have a trial now. Well, you could have a trial on these 2 little misdemeanor charges, I
Yeah.
guess, but they've never indicted him.
So they're going to go and the way it'll be presented, they'll reconvene and they'll try to figure out their next move. Meanwhile, that clock is ticking because doesn't the statute of limitations on the gun charge, doesn't that run out like in October or something?
October, 5 years.
For the love.
Yeah. Well, but Dana, I think a lot of this brinksmanship, because that's what it is. We've asked all along. I think you've probably asked me 10 times, what's taking so long? Why do you think this is going on for so long? And the reason is it ratchets up a lot of pressure on a court, for example, to accept the plea agreement if we're now at the 11th hour, and if they don't dispose of the case, everything could end up lapsing under the statute of limitations. So I actually think this is part of the strategy to delay it as long as they could delay it. But they can't let the thing completely run out, because then it'll be bad for Biden that they never did anything about Hunter, and he's got to run on that. So what they were trying to do was string it out as long as they can, give him a completely irrelevant or trivial plea agreement, and make the whole thing go away. And then you ratchet up the pressure on the court by waiting till the last minute, because now the judge knows if she doesn't take the plea, maybe all the counts end up lapsing.
This is, I mean, it's, as much as we kind of were joking about his pot smoking attorney on the balcony with his bong, it looks like, they may have it on its face. It looks bad for the Hunter Biden team, but this may actually be kind of like a little victory for them, because then they can just, as you were just saying, string this along, push this out as much as possible, and then get into a position where you either get in with a plea deal or nothing.
Yeah, that is true. The thing they didn't factor in, though, is the thing about this proceeding today and how unusual it was and how it blew up is they've liked the whole idea for 5 years of this being under the radar. I mean, we care about it, but generally speaking, the public doesn't. Something like this makes people start to pay attention to it. And it's going to be harder for them to get away with a sweetheart plea deal once people educate themselves on what this is all about and how involved in it the president is.
Oh, yeah. And now in his DOJ, I mean, this really does hurt Merrick Garland. I can't imagine him not signing off on the way that no independent investigator, no indictment at all. I mean, how do you have this much evidence and this much of a case, and then the DOJ is kind of silent here, and there's, as you said, 2 little misdemeanors and that's it. It does look, there's definitely like there's 2 tiers of justice here. So by all accounts, last word on this, Andy, it looks like you think that they're either going to have to accept like a much reduced, probably very unsatisfactory for people who believe in justice, plea deal for Hunter or nothing. That's probably what this will amount to.
Well, look, they could go back to the drawing board and try to figure something out. And I wouldn't put anything past them, Dana, because if once you understand all of the things that we just laid out, looking at the criminal procedure, you got to sit back for a second and say, man, this was audacious that they thought that they could get away with this right in front of everybody's nose. And I'm just of a mind that if that's how people are wired, you have no idea what they'll try to get away with.
That's a powerful thought right there. Andy McCarthy, you have to get his book because Ball of Collusion, I mean, it's still happening now. The plot to rig an election, destroy a presidency. Andy McCarthy, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for setting this perspective for us. We appreciate your time. We know you're busy. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
Of course.